there was an article in the paper, Jack Hamlin shoots down the last plane on D-Day, which I still have. And that's the first time that I remembered that, Jack, you did shoot down an airplane. We were called the Rescue Flotilla number 1. And then we also were called the Matchbox Fleet. And the reason for that, because all our cutters were all wood. And just one bullet, we carried 1,900 gallons of high gasoline. And one bullet into that wood, and we would have blown up. We did not lose any of our 60 Coastguard cutters by bullets.
Warning, the frontline testimony you're about to hear is, at times, extremely graphic. The realities of war are often difficult, but it's vitally important that these stories are told and the lessons are learned. Viewer discretion is advised.
My story is to tell you that I was playing baseball for the New York Yankees in the minor leagues in Joplin, Missouri. And I caught rheumatic fever that time. This was 1939. I was laid up for about 11 months, and then the war broke out, and I decided I wanted to go into the service. I went down to the Marine Corps and to enlist with some friends of mine. They turned me down. Then I didn't know the reason why, but they wrote me a letter and said that I had an enlarged heart from the x-ray. Then I went down to the Air Corps, thought maybe they might take me. The Naval Air Corps turned me down. So I did find a couple boys I'd been playing baseball with in Joplin, Missouri. And they said, Jack, we're going to the Coast Guard. I said, what is the Coast Guard? They said, as far as we know, they guard the shores of the United States. I said, that sounds good. What about combat? She says, sir, I don't think the Coast Guard is involved in the Coast Guard. Well, as it ended up, I ended up on Omaha Beach. So I found out that the Coast Guard did go overseas. The reason we went overseas, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, well, his idea was take the Coast Guard off of the East Coast, which we did. We took 60 Coast Guard cutters, 83 foot long, with a crew of 13, and they sent us aboard Liberty ships and cargo ships and sent us to England, Poole, England, to prepare ourselves for whatever might happen. Of course, at that time, we had no idea what our involvement was going to be, that we were going to be what we did end up being called the Rescue Flotilla number 1, which meant that we were all going to go to the 5 different beaches that were designated at Omaha in France for the invasion. There was 60 Coast Guard cutters, as I say. I was on one of the 15 that was sent to Omaha Beach. We had no idea what we actually were going to do until the day we left. I was designated as one of 2 of the 13 to be a rescue swimmer. They knew I loved to swim, and they knew that I'd take the training for it while I was in the Coast Guard, that I was a swimmer. My duty was, we took our little cutters and we followed the LCVPs and the LSTs into the beach. We had no idea what the beach was until after the war. We found out it was the Omaha 15 cutters. On that day, we didn't get in the way of the LCVs or the LSTs going to the beach. We stayed out of their way until they were in trouble, like hit a mine in the water, or they were hit by the German shells. When we noticed this, then our ensign, our commander was the ensign, he said, we got to go in to save those boys in the water. And we did, and I was designated with, not with a life belt or anything, but all I had around me was a line attached to me, and then the larger boys was kept on board our cutters to help us when we brought the bodies or the wounded soldiers back to our cutters. We had to have them picked up, put on our cutter, and we could only take so many. It left to our commander. Now we've got enough. We got to take these wounded out to the hospital ships. The hospital ships were 10 miles offshore, out of the range of the German guns, of course. We took them out, and the speed we had in our cutters could only go about 11 knots. That's not very fast, and it was a heavy sea, so it took us quite a while to get them to the hospital ships. When we did get them to the hospital ships, we had the Navy there to help us take them off of our cutter, and then we would go back for Omaha Beach. On D-Day, we only made actually 2 trips back in, and I couldn't tell you how many that I and my other swimmers saved out of the water, but I would estimate it was 50 during the day that we saved out of the water and took to the hospital ship. It's just quite a memory because when you go in the water, all you can think of, are you going to get hit? There was bullets hitting all around us. I never saw Omaha Beach. Didn't have the chance to see it. I think the closest we got in, as I heard, was probably 500 yards off the beach. There was, as I said, there was 15 cutters, and out of our 15 cutters, and the others at the 5 beaches, we saved 1,486 wounded and drowning soldiers that day of D-Day. Quite an accomplishment to us. We didn't know all this until the war was over, of course, that what we had done. Then a little thing happened to me during the war, that my gunner's mate was the other swimmer, and he happened to be in the water at the time. There was a German plane flying, 2 German planes were flying over the beach. They said, "Jack, get up and help shoot the 20-millimeter gun that we had." I happened to be aboard the cutter at that time. He was in the water. I said, "What do you mean? I've only shot it once." The 20-millimeter I had shot when I was in Newport, Rhode Island, where we were stationed at a practice round out in the Atlantic Ocean. I did jump on the 20-millimeter, and I started shooting along with the other cutters and other ships there at the German planes flying over. And just by the witnesses say they saw my bullets flare, the bullet going into the German plane. And I got credit of assisting shooting down the only 2 German planes on Omaha Beach that day. That is quite an honor to me, and they mentioned to me that Jack, you shot the boy, you shot him down. I didn't know anything about it, forgot all about it, till I got home and read in the newspaper. There was an article sent that Jack Hamlin shot down the only plane on Omaha Beach on D-Day. It was quite an honor to me. The trouble with that I had was not worried about myself in the water. It was the idea, was the person that I'm in the water trying to rescue, is he dead or not? You couldn't actually tell. Most of them were in shock. They all had wounds. The only wounds that I saw was to the face. A lot of them had the chins blown off, their eye. It's horrible to talk about now, but it took a long time for me to forget those. Didn't ever dream about it. It didn't bother me after the war for a while. You did think about it, trying to remember, just, is there anybody else that you could have saved? I only remember one person that I couldn't get to him, and he was yelling, but he was just too far away from the line that I had tied to me was probably about 30 yards long. So I couldn't go an awful long way from my cutter when I was bringing the wounded back to the cutter. But the one little boy, it was out of my reach, and I couldn't get it. I know he was yelling for help, 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 and I couldn't help him. That's the only regret that I have. Really, I can say on D-Day that I saved everybody that I could, but I did not save that one soldier. I regret it to this day, but I have finally let it get out of my mind, and I don't think about it anymore.
How did you hear about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
It's kind of funny. I was playing catch with a bunch of friends of mine out in my front yard, and my mother yelled at us, "Jack, you all come in the house a minute. I want to hear something on the radio." And I said, "Well, what is it, Mother?" He said, "I think there's a war being declared." Well, even the war didn't mean anything to me at my age. What is war? But we were playing baseball in the front yard. We all went in and listened to Pearl Harbor. Naturally, I didn't know what Pearl Harbor meant, where it was, It wasn't soon later that I found out all about it. But that's how I got notice of it, that the radio was on declaring Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had struck. I was a member of a Boy Scout camp number 18, And there was 3 boys there, and they said, "Jack, we're going to join the Marines. Come and go with us." Well, I went with them to join the Marines. That's when I was first found out, and I took the examination and had an x-ray taken that I had found that I had developed an enlarged heart. The Marines turned me down, but I still want to go to service. So I think I said before that I went down to join the Naval Air Corps, and I was turned down there also because of the enlarged heart. That was more so. Then I found a couple of boys. I talked to a couple of boys I've been playing baseball with, and they said, "Jack, we're going to join the Coast Guard." That's how I got into the Coast Guard. And to be honest with you, I don't ever remember taking a physical examination with the Coast Guard. I'm sure I had to, but the enlarged heart didn't bother them at all for being a sailor. But that's how I ended up being in the Coast Guard. And if you can ever say, no, I did not regret it, because 4 years the Coast Guard treated me royally. I had training in Algiers, New Orleans. I was there, I think, for close to 90 days, and we were trained by the Marines there, so we got good training. Then when I left New Orleans, I was sent to Boston, Massachusetts. And in Boston, Massachusetts, all I did there was get on a small boat, and we would go out during the port there at Boston Harbor, and just check on the boats there. Then, after a while, they asked me if I'd like to go to what they call a boatswain mate school, and that was going to be in New York. And I said, yes. He said, we'll train you there how to handle and what you do on small boats. That's when I became acquainted and learned to be a boatswain's mate in the school. That's how I ended up. When I finished there, they sent me to Newport, Rhode Island. I'll get it straight for you. In Newport, Rhode Island, I was put on what we call an 83-foot cutter, a Coast Guard cutter. And all we did from Newport, Rhode Island was go out from Newport, Rhode Island, from Block Island down to Long Island, New York, patrolling for submarines. No, we never did find a submarine. We had a crew of 13 on our boat, and we had about 5 Coast Guard cutters there at Newport, Rhode Island, doing the same thing that I was doing. Then we got notice that the war had broke out. They were preparing war, the invasion of Normandy, and we didn't know anything about it at the time. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt designated that the Coast Guard would be sent to England to prepare for the invasion of Normandy. Can I hand you a picture here?
I'll have you hold it up to the camera, if you
All
don't
right.
mind.
This is a picture of myself and 2 Coast Guard cutters at Omaha Beach. This was taken by another cutter and is sent to all of us. But the Coast Guard cutter was 83 foot long, and it was all made of wood. So we had a draft. That means underneath, in the water, for the invasion, we wouldn't hit any mines. As far, it was all wood at the bottom. So if we hit a mine, it wouldn't explode us. But there was 5 beaches, and we were divided up, 15 to each beach. And we, from that day, we didn't count them, of course, but from the 15 cutters at Omaha Beach, I imagine we saved at least over 150 soldiers out of the water. But altogether, with the 60 Coast Guard cutters we had at the 5 beaches, we did save 1,486 and 1 female nurse. There was a female nurse on a British LST, and she was blown off into the water, and one of the Coast Guard cutters did pick the female nurse up and save her life. The armament we had the depth charges, of course, the invasion. We took those off. We had one 20 millimeter and 2 50 calibers that were mounted on each side of the gunnels of the boat. But that's the only armament we had. We weren't expected to kill anybody. That wasn't our purpose. Our purpose was to be a lifeguard, to be a savior, to take care of the boys. That's what they trained us for. We had nets on the side of our Coast Guard cutters that when we brought some of the boys, if we didn't have to help them in the water, they could climb up themselves. But we didn't have too many of those climb up. The water was, I've heard, I know it was cold, but I've always heard from 40 degrees to 42, something like that. But the temperature of the water was 40 degrees. And all we wore just a regular, our dungarees and tennis shoes. And some of us had a small life belt around us. I don't recall myself having a life belt. I really don't. They asked me that several times, didn't you have some kind of a life preserver on you when you jumped in? I said, no, the only thing I can remember, the short time that I was in the water, I always had the line tied around me with the bigger boys on board the cutter holding on to the line to pull me back when I had rescued a boy and then bringing the body and bringing the wounded soldier to our cutter. They would help pull him aboard. And then it was left to our little commanding officer and to the chief mechanic, well, we better go now. We better take him out to the hospital ship.
What were the tactics that you all were trained for when it comes to locating a submarine? What were you looking out for?
All we were doing, we had a sonar on our boat, and they would pick up anything, but we never picked it up. I understand there was one cutter out of the Hamptons, I believe it was, that they did sink a submarine there. But we were just, all we had for them was our depth charges. But we never used them because we never, as I say, we never sighted a submarine. We were lucky there. There were so many ships that were, cargo ships that were sunk off the East Coast by the submarines. We lost an awful lot of cargo. After D-Day, we were sent back to Poole, England. We went back to Poole, England. They said, Jack, we're going to give you a test. I said, what's that about? We're going to invent you in rating and make you a chief boat. I was a first-class boatswain during D-Day. That's pretty high ranking. And they said, we're going to make you a chief or you take a test. So I took the test, and I became the chief boatswain mate of my cutter. And they also took the commanding officer, who was a commission, was a lieutenant. They took him off and half my crew while I was back after D-Day and sent them back to the United States to prepare them, let them help prepare this for the invasion of Japan. So they went back preparing for Japan, and I was left in Poole. Then from Poole, after they cleared the port of Cherbourg in France, I was sent there with my crew of 8 that we would go to Cherbourg, France, and patrol out of there on the submarines. On the deck of after the invasion, we put our depth charges back on. We had 4 depth charges on the rear and a 20-millimeter gun, as I said before. We put those back on and went back to Cherbourg, France. Well, one night I was having a little party in Cherbourg, France. I had met a soldier in the army, and he said, Jack, he says, when it's Christmas Eve, 1944, he said, we've got I'm going to bring 2 nurses and some turkey down to your little cutter. And he said, let's have a little party. I said, all right, here it is, Christmas Eve in 1944. He brings 2 beautiful nurses down. One of them I fall in love with, I really do. And I went with her for about, I'd say a year. But during we were having dinner, we get a call that there's a transport in trouble about 5 miles out of Cherbourg, France, at buoy so-and-so. We need your help, send you out. I should not have done it. I should take the nurses with me, but I put the 2 nurses back on the shore, but I did take the army men with me because I had let 4 of my crew off for that day because they were good looking. I didn't want them fooling around with the nurses. So I sent them, let them have liberty that night for Christmas Eve. And when I got the call, all I had was a 4-man crew. I was in charge of the cutter, 4-man crew, and the army surgeon. We went out to 5 miles where we found that the transport by the name of the Leopoldville with the 66th Infantry Division. 2,200 boys were aboard, and they were being torpedoed by a German submarine. Well, it took about, it's hard to say. But I went alongside, and I told some of the guys on the Leopoldville, jump. They were about 20 feet above me. I said, there's no way you get here unless you jump. We did have, say, maybe 3, 4, 5, I don't remember counting. But one of them I do remember he broke his arm when he hit something on our deck. We saved those 5 boys off the Leopoldville, and it was no later than about another half an hour that the Leopoldville started to sink. They lost that night, I think it was over 800 that they lost on the Leopoldville, either from the explosion, from the torpedo, from the submarine, or they were drowning. You jump in the water, and they had 1 or 2 little tugs come alongside. Now the Leopoldville couldn't move because the captain of the Leopoldville had sunk the anchor, and the crew who was supposed to take care of the anchor had got in the boats, and they left the Leopoldville. They were Congo natives, and they didn't speak a word of English. But anyway, the crew left the Leopoldville, but the captain stayed with the Leopoldville and went down and he drowned when the Leopoldville sunk. I don't know how many we actually saved that night, but there was a British destroyer came alongside and took about 300 off. I forget the name of it right now, but they saved about 300 from the Leopoldville. This was Christmas Eve of 1944, and that is one night that I will never forget. It just takes time. I don't even talk about it anymore, but it didn't hurt me. It used to hurt me, but there was the 2 nurses brought down. I did fall in love with one of them, and her name was Jacqueline Manetta. And I kept a picture of her, and I have a picture over here on the wall. And when I went back one time to France, I took it with me, and I gave it to a little French girl. And she says, I'll see if I can find her for you. I said, it'd be awful nice. A year later, she did call and say, Jack, I have found the family of the nurse that you went with when you were in Cherbourg. She left nursing, went to Paris, and became one of the top models in Paris. Well, I tell you what, it was a thrill to see that they had found something of the nurse's family. I went back to Normandy about 6 months later, and I got to meet the daughter. She had deceased. I met the daughter and the 2 granddaughters of the nurse who became model and that I had fallen in love with. It was quite an adventure to meet them. We had dinner, as a matter of fact, arranged by a French lady by the name of Alice Fernandez. As a matter of fact, little Alice is 22 years old. She took my picture that I had of this French nurse, and on the back of it was written the name and the address, which I couldn't read. She could found it all out, and she went all through the archives, and she found that she had died, gotten married, but had this child and the grandchildren. And she arranged me to meet them in Cherbourg. I had a wonderful dinner with them, met them, had pictures with them, and it was a thrill to get back with her family. I've been back 7 times, and it is really a pleasure. The people at Normandy, I have never met more friendly people. The children there, they are taught. We are here because of the veteran. Every veteran that goes back to Normandy is treated royally. I tell you, that these young little children come up to you because their parents have told you, see these boys, see these veterans, they're the reason that you're here today. So I've had little children come up to me and say, sir, were you killed? Well, what they really mean is, Jack, were you wounded? But you get explained to them, yes, I'm here, everything's fine, I wasn't wounded, I was one of the lucky ones. But the children there, they are taught history. I think it should be taught more to the children in the United States about World War II. It's terrible to say, but I have run into, I call them teenagers. They don't know anything about the name. What does Omaha Beach mean? Who is that? Where is it? What do you do at Omaha Beach? Why are you talking about it? It's a shame that goes on. That's why I have been making speeches. Anytime I'm asked, I'll go to high schools, I'll go to grade schools, I'll go to medium schools, I go to colleges, and I'll speak to them. But where you really are interested is the younger ones. Their parents are telling them, now here's the history of them. You're going to find out something that I can't tell you about. You're going to meet a veteran. He's going to talk to you and tell you what war is like. You're going to find out that it's not good, that they all regret that they had to go to war, but they went because they were making freedom for other little children such as you. I appreciate them all because it's really a pleasure. But this is a terrible thing to say, but I have talked to high school kids and I have talked to college kids, and honestly, they don't pay attention. They don't understand. They don't even know what a World War II was like. All they're thinking about, they're thinking about their future. They're hoping there's not another war. I agree with them. I hope there's not another war, but there's so much conflict going on right now. We have to be very, very careful what we do. You can hear the politics, this way, that way. Why we can't all agree on one thing, and that way is one word, peace. Why can't we believe in peace? Why can't other countries not be jealous of us? Why can't we help them out? Let them understand how we live, that we share what we have. We want to share it with them. But life has been wonderful to me. Pardon my voice, but 101 years, it's been wonderful. I'm ready to carry on another 1 or 2 years. I'm already planning on going back to Normandy in June, and I'm very lucky. I have my retired doctor, Dr. Knowlton, who goes with me on the last 3 trips I've been, and they all love him because he's a history buff. When we visit people, they will sit down with us, and the doctor will even talk to them. If they have a personal problem, he will talk to them just like he's a doctor. And they all appreciate him so much. You know, there's very little we did, really. We were in Poole, England, and all around us were Army boys getting ready also. But the only preparation we actually did, we didn't do any swimming at all. All we did was prepare our nets that would go over the side. And as I tell you, we only knew we were going to be a lifeguard. We didn't know what beach we were going to. We didn't know when we were going to it, how long we'd be there, and what we would do when we got there. That was all left to the private meetings that our commanding officer would attend. And he attended meetings every day. And all we did was stay aboard and just wait. I'll put it that way. We didn't swim, we didn't do anything else but eat, and with the friendly neighbors we had there at Poole, England, and they were wonderful to us. All of them were wonderful. They knew we were going to be going soon. We'd be leaving us. But there were so many soldiers and sailors that were stationed in and around Poole, England.
Did you have any experiences going to London on leave, or?
I got to go to London one time. That's all, and we were there just a short time. They took us up in a special bus, certain one of us, and I hardly remember anything about London, really.
The reason I asked that is because they had the buzz bombs.
I remember the buzz bombs from when I was in Poole, but never when I was in London did it happen. But in Poole, we could hear them, the buzz going over, but we never had any hit around Poole. They were all headed for London. Yes, you're right on that.
The invasion was supposed to happen on the 5th, but they put it back a day because of the weather. So were you guys out in the water for a full day before?
You know, it's a good thing you've got that. That's the first time I remember somebody asked me that question. But it is true. We did leave the dock to go to what they call, it was the Island of Wight, I believe it was, yes. And that's where all the convoys would meet for the invasion to go. We did go out about halfway, and that was it. We got our orders as far as we go, and then we found out that the invasion was put off until the next day. We came back in, but I remember nothing about that at all. It just was told to me, remind me that yes, that Jack, we did go out a little ways, and that it was called off, and we came back in.
Did you feel like it was going to be that big of a deal?
No, had no idea. Honestly, in our minds, maybe the other boys did, but I did not. I was not nervous. I can't recall being nervous at any time. I was scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. I will admit that. But as far as my memory of the day before, or that day that we actually left, is vague to me. Very, very vague. Because I don't remember anything of, that's wrong, I shouldn't say that, because one thing actually happened to me. Going across on D-Day, I knew that there was an LST number 50, and on that LST 50 was a good friend of mine, was Lieutenant Ralph Carter. Now, we had played football and baseball in high school together, and I had known he was in England someplace, and I knew that he was on the LST 50, just because of letters I got from home. I never got to meet him at all, but going across D-Day, and it's dark that morning, just by luck of 5,000 ships going across to Normandy, I look up and I see an LST number, LST 50. And on this LST, I say, well, I know a band there. I said, Skipper, do you mind getting a little bit closer? Let's pull alongside. It's still dark, just getting started. And I yell up. I said, anybody aboard there can hear me? Do you have a Ralph Carter aboard? Somebody, luckily, on the deck heard me, said, yes, sir, who are you? I said, well, I'm a friend of Ralph Carter. They tell me Ralph Carter is our commanding officer. I'll get him for you. Well, of all the luck in the world, he comes in and he says, who is it? Then I tell him it's Jack Hamlin. He looks down and he says, Jack, where did you get that rowboat? Well, that got to me real quick. And I said, Ralph Carter, I know what you are. I said, let me tell you something. If your LST is sunk, you be the last SOB that I'll pick up out of that water. Well, I could hear some chuckles from the vessel, because here he is, a commanding officer. Here's a friend of mine who, after we left high school, he went on to University of Missouri and was a star football player there for 4 years. And he was commander of the LST 50. And he says, after he told me, what are you doing on that rowboat, that got to me? And I said, boy, you SOB, you'll be the last one I'll pick out of the channel if you are torpedoed. And I can remember seeing some of the, what they call the ducks. They're the transport little ducks who had the wheels on. They go land and water. I can remember seeing one of those going down. That's terrible, because I don't think any of the boys were saved on that duck. It wasn't near us, but I could see them going in. They weren't too far away in the dark that I did see that duck going down. And I did see 2 or 3 other landing barges that I can remember had hit not from the shells, but from mines, and that were sinking. So most of the soldiers we picked up were from the LCVPs, which had 30 men, about 30 men on each one, and they were hitting mines, not shells from the shore. Because if you saw a shell hit one of those LCVPs, there was nobody left there. that was completely destroyed. So the ones that we were actually saving probably were caused by the mines underneath the water, that their LCVPs were hitting that. And that's how we... The movies, I've seen several of the movies, and the movies to me are real. They bring back things that I'd forgotten, and some of the scenes that I've seen are actually just exactly what happened there. Because we were so busy, and I was in and out of the water, that I can't remember seeing too many of them destroyed. All I can remember is seeing just soldiers in the water, and maybe an LCVP here that was half sunk, or you could see something out of the water. But from my my memory and what I saw, it's awfully hard for me to, in reality, to describe it to you. It's still there, but there's no way that I can actually tell you what happened. It's only a memory, and it's hard to recall. If something actually happened, somebody you touched or saw, you can relate that to. But it's so hard for me now, even after all these years. For a while, everything came back to me real clear. As time goes on, I've kept forgetting, and I can't refresh my mind. We were called the Rescue Flotilla Number 1. And then we also were called the Matchbox Fleet. And the reason for that, because all our cutters were all wood, and just one bullet. We carried 1,900 gallons of high gasoline, and one bullet into that wood, and we would have blown up. We did not lose any of our 60 Coast Guard cutters by bullets. We did lose 2 of them because of a storm that hit on that day, and they were destroyed. But we only lost 2 out of the 60. But we did lose a sailor. My original cutter was 83-408, meaning 83 foot long. But then during the war, they changed us to 1 up to 60. I was cutter number 23.
Thank you for explaining
Yeah,
that.
and there was 15 of us went to Omaha Beach, and 15 of us went to Utah Beach. Then the others were divided up to the other 3 beaches. When I was in New Orleans, I did quite a bit of that. I put swimming in certain pools and all that. And I today I can't remember why I was chosen, but I was small and I could swim real good. So when we were on the cutters, they didn't want a big guy out in the water. They wanted the smaller guys, needed the big boys aboard the cutter. So when we brought the body deck, they could pull them up and put them on the cutter. But I was chosen to be one of the swimmers, and I thought it was great that I was chosen. You're a lifeguard, and say, you want to be a lifeguard, that's what you are. That was our job. We would pull up so close to them. And we had a big hook, probably about 8 foot long, and they had it on the hand, they had a little hook on the end, and a lot of times you could grab them by their uniform and pull them. So we didn't have to do that. But then we would find one. See, the current there was moved between 8 and 10 miles an hour, the current coming out of the north, out of the channel. And the bodies would start drifting away from you. That's the reason we couldn't use the hooks on them. We had to take the line we were on and then go after them as far as we could. But maneuvering the cutters around was awfully hard. You got to watch that you didn't run over one of them or something. It's horrible to say, and you don't like to do it when you go to school and talk to the little children, but they should know about the injuries. And I did see several where had half their faces blown off. Now, that's a terrible thing. If you see you're picking up a body and carrying him to your cutter, and you'll see half his chin hanging down. Now, of course, they had a uniform on. You don't know about the arms, but a lot of times you could tell that he'd lost his arm or he'd lost part of his leg. That's the hard part, and that's the hard part to remember. You asked me a question, do you remember the first one? No, I don't remember the first one, but if I could recall, I'm sure the first man probably didn't have a really serious injury of any kind. He was drowning, And I just happened to grab him and pull him to the cutter. Then the more I was in the water and seeing more of the bodies that are floating, then you realize that so many of them are not in there just because of drowning. They're in there because they were blown off something, and they're wounded, and somewhere or another they're dying. They're not dead yet. When you can tell when a person's dead, and that when you no need to push it aside, it'll float away from you. But when you pick them up, and you know they're crying, they're alive, that some part of their body is gone from them. You can't see it because they've got that uniform on. The only victims you ever see with the wounded are the ones that their hands are gone, or either their face is halfway destroyed or bloody. That's the thing I do remember so much. And it's not the idea that every one of them that I picked up, but you could see them with them, 3 or 4 at a time. When I went out there into the water, there wasn't one. There was maybe 10, 20, 30 bodies that you could pick up at the same time. But I couldn't do it, and I only had one other swimmer, and he was not in the water at the same time I was. We just took turns. The length of the time I was in the water, it couldn't be more than 3 to 5 minutes. That water was 40 degrees. No, you couldn't put up with it. And then people say, well, you're scared. Yes, I'm scared. I was scared I might drown myself. I was afraid that I couldn't get back to the cutter with the current moving at the rate that it moves. And as I could see the bodies going, I knew that my body would be moving the same rate that they are. So you had to grab them before they got away. And for me to swim in that cold water and see the waves there were probably a sea, is anywhere from a sea of 3 or 6. That goes according to how high the waves are. Well, nothing was smooth at all. It was very hard. You could see a body for a moment, then he would disappear because a wave would come along, and you'd have to swim to him. Well, he might be there and he might not. He might have floated away. But there's so many others, and I hate to use that word, so many others, but there was bodies everywhere.
The priority is to get the wounded.
Yes.
Did you guys pick up any of the dead bodies, or were they...
None at all. No, sir. I didn't pick up a dead body. No, sirree.
So what would happen to those men?
All right. Those men either floated all the way down the channel, but there's an awful lot of bodies the next day came ashore. Just a lot of them came ashore at Normandy, of course. And see, I was never on the shore at Omaha Beach until about 65 years later. I got to walk on the shore of Omaha Beach. But I didn't see the Omaha Beach. I didn't see the shoreline at all in the water. I guess I wasn't interested about that. All I had to do was worry about what I was doing at this place about 500 yards off Omaha Beach. I'm absolutely sure that you'd go to the person, you knew right off he was dead because of how he's floating, maybe face down, something else. So not push, you didn't have to push him away, but you had to just go at the neck. But I would say you could compare with the wounded with the dead, how many there were. 50-50, I would say. But there was enough wounded that needed help that you didn't have time to pick up a dead. That was not our duty at all. And they told us, definitely, do not pick up any of the dead. That'll be done later. I can't really remember anybody grabbing me and pulling me down or anything. If you gave them an order, and it's kind of hard to tell a wounded man what to do. You're there to save him. So all I can do is say, we're helping you. We're helping you. I'll get you to the cutter. I'll save you. I don't remember what words I used, but that's what we probably would have said to them. And then you'd grab them, whatever you could, by their clothing and pull them along with you. So there was not an awful lot of, after I got them, there was not too much swimming left for me to do. All I could do was hold on to them and tell the boys on the cutter, pull me in, pull me in. So that the swimming was all over.
And so, your cutter, it's not the largest ship in the world.
Yeah.
Did it ever, did you guys get capacity, or were you able to, you know, what? Here's my question.
Yeah.
What happens to the wounded once they get on the cutter, sir?
The only place we could put them would be on deck. We couldn't be below deck. It didn't have room at all. But so all we could do is wait. We left that to the skipper, how many we had, when we should leave. And I couldn't even tell you, probably it was 25. It was probably the most we could do, put them on our deck. That's about all the room we had. And then we didn't have anything to cover them up with. We didn't take any of them down below. Some cutter told me they took a couple of them down below. I couldn't figure out how they'd get them down through a little hole to a bed and take care of them. But one man told me he did on his cutter. But not us. We kept them on the deck, and we left it to the engine to say, we got enough, we got to go to the hospital ship. That was 10 miles. That's what lived with me for a long time. Help me, please, help me, please. That's all. He probably says something else. But it was a help me, please, help me, please. And he was drifting. He was alive. I don't remember him wounded. And I don't think from his face, everything was fine. I can remember his face at a distance and in the dark, and his yelling was more than anything. But pretty soon after he drifts away through the channel, because that channel is moving, as I told you, 8 to 10 knots. And that's pretty fast for water to be moving. And he drifted away beyond my 30 yards that I had to take care of.
Absolutely. And were there cases where some of these men were totally fine and they could just swim to the cutter?
No, none of the one. I don't. The only ones that they did that, we would pull alongside. The skipper would get them close enough that they could take the hooks. But none of them that I remember, they could have been. I will not deny that. There could have been someone able to swim to the cutter, but I don't recall any of them where we were that did swim to the cutter.
Got it.
It's a good question, but I don't remember one helping themselves, no. There's one incident I remember I'll tell you about that I kind of was honored because I had witnesses. There was two airplanes, German planes, flying over the beaches, strafing the troops on the beaches. We had a 20 millimeter on our cutter, and the other swimmer was a gunner's mate, Jack. His name is Jack also, and he was in the water. At the time these planes were going over, somebody on my crew yelled, "Jack, you've shot the 20 millimeter before. Get on there and see if you can shoot that one of the German planes down." I said, all right. So I jumped on, and believe me, a 20 millimeter, you've got to know what you're doing. And I'd only fired it no more than once. That was when I was back on patrol in Newport, Rhode Island, and we were out in the Atlantic, and they let me take a practice shot on the 20 millimeter. So I was the only one aboard who could shoot the darn thing. And I did, by luck, get aboard, and I did get to shooting. And two of the boys on our cutter said, "You actually hit I saw the flak going, I saw the bullets flare go into the German plane, Jack, and you did shoot that plane." Now, there could have been other ships shooting at the same time, but I got the honor of shooting the last plane down on D-Day at Omaha Beach. There were just two planes. Now, the other plane got away, of course, but we did two, and my bullets and probably bullets from the other little ships all around were shooting at him also. But the only thing I had was witnesses they could see from our 20 millimeter, because every other bullet there's a flash with it. And they said they honestly said they saw it. Now, when I came home and I'd forgotten all about this. When I got back to Springfield here to my home after the war, there was an article in the paper, Jack Hamlin shoots down the last plane on D-Day, which I still have. And that's the first time that I remembered that, Jack, you did shoot down an airplane. It was reminded me by my newspaper article.
That's incredible.
But I did have a letter that, yes, we did witness it.
From your perspective, though, could you see after you hit the plane, did it go down?
No, sir, no. It went on. No, not at all. No. Did not see it go down, so I couldn't verify that. That's just from a newspaper article and from the witnesses that saw that the German plane was hit. And there was only 2 airplanes. And that's the only combat that I really got into was D-Day and with the Leopoldville on the December 24th. No, that was my combat experience. I wasn't like the infantry and like the people in the submarines and all. They're the ones that I called the heroes. I was a lifeguard, and I like to be called a hero. There's nothing wrong with that. You can brag on it. It makes you feel proud. But I know personally that what I did can never compare with what the paratroopers did, what the people in the submarines did, what the infantrymen did when they're in a foxhole and they got shells going all around them, bursting in the trees and having themselves killed by shrapnel. They're the heroes. And I have met several of them when I returned from Normandy, and I have met several of they're all not gone now, but the Band of Brothers. I had become very personal friends going back to Normandy after the war and visiting with what they call the Band of Brothers. I lost the last one. He was 101 years old, Pee Wee Martin, a good friend, and he was the last of the Band of Brothers, and he died just a month or 2 ago. I didn't go to his funeral, but I was sorry he was gone because he and I meet every time I go back to Normandy. But our meeting is concluded now since he's deceased.
You have to carry on.
I will carry on, because it's terrible to say, and then not terrible to say, it's a pleasure to be able to go back to Normandy. The people there are waiting for you, and I've made so many real good friends, close friends, that when I get to there, believe me, it's just like I am honored by all of them. I'm celebrated beyond my control. It's a wonderful visit. Well, it had the lights on. They had the lights on. It's 5 miles off, and you could see the lights where it was. And we knew what they were. They were at buoy so and so. That's a marker for the channel coming into Cherbourg Port. So we knew just how many buoys we had to go before we reached it. So we had directions already that were very easy to find. And when we find them, all the boys, when I saw them, they were up on the deck, and they all had their uniforms on, and they were all standing in line. They hadn't been told or warned anything that they actually were going to sink. In my mind, they were not told, because they were all standing in line. Then they got the idea that he didn't have any lifeboats because that was taken down by the crew and nobody else was there to help them with any lifeboat. There's no lifeboats for them to have. For a while there wasn't chaos. Then it started to sink, and you could see that it started to sink. That's when the boys started jumping from the Leopoldville. You could see them jumping. And as I told you, we went alongside, and they had to jump to my cutter. And we only had about 3 or 4 did you jump. And they were 20 feet above me on the deck. Then they started jumping into the cold water, and they had 2 small tugs come out from Cherbourg. And this was a terrible thing to say, but you could see and hear boys jumping in the water, but they would jump between the tug and the transport Leopoldville, and they'd be crushed in between, and you could hear that scream. That lives with you a long time for the Leopoldville. Don't know how many were killed that way. But they did lose off the Leopoldville, I'm sure it's a little over 100 men. There was no more than probably maybe 300. I know there was one, I think I said before, there was a British frigate, a British destroyer, a British, that came alongside of it and took off, they say, about 300 men of the 2,200 aboard. So that's all that really, outside of our small, there were only 2 Coast Guard cutters like us in Cherbourg stationed there that went out to help. They had other small boats and other small little things, but they're not big enough to save anybody. The most we probably saved a day, again, came close to 100, but I'm including the other Coast Guard cutter. That's what I meant to say. My words are that we Coast Guard, not just us, saved probably 100 of the Leopoldville victims. We had the sergeant went with us, the Army sergeant. He went over the side, not into the water, but leaned over the side, and he would pull as many as he could back up. And then I had a boy on the other side. He was trying to do the same thing. So that's where we saved most of them, is by pulling them out of the water.
And so no swimming involved this time?
No swimming at all, no. They were just brand new recruits. As a matter of fact, they were recruits, and the story was they were headed for Bastogne, Battle of the Bulge, is where they were headed for. But they didn't get there. When they, as I understand, most of them stayed in Cherbourg or went to Brest, B-R-E-S-T, another place. I don't think, the story goes, that's what I have to go by, it's what I've read, that most of them went to Brest and stayed in Cherbourg. I can tell you this, I've had 2 of them we pulled out of the water, come to visit me here in Springfield. And one of them lives in Colorado, one of them lived in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And they came to visit me, and they say, Jack, we can remember that it was Coast Guard that saved us. And I know there's only 2 Coast Guard cutters, so I'm not saying I saved them, but they were giving me the thanks. The Coast Guard saved them in the water, but they came to visit me. But they were survivors of the Leopoldville. Nobody knows.
You know, I mean, and so
with a uniform on, in that cold water, you don't swim very far. It went down, yes, it went down. Yeah, it went down. It took a little over an hour, I think it was, that I have read. Again, I have to go what I read about it after I left there and taking our people back in. That the ship, it took about an hour for it to go down. We took them ashore, back to Cherbourg.
Were the nurses still there?
I think they were. I can't remember. They didn't. I doubt if they were there, because most of when we got there was all kinds of Army personnel waiting there to help us, and that's when they took the people off the tugs that were bringing them in, or any boat that were bringing them in. And I can remember telling stories that the water was so cold that one guy actually sat up, but he was dead, but something in the body made him move up. I read about that, but he was laying down, and they knew he was dead, but then they raised up. They thought he was alive, but it was from the action of the cold water they did that. Things that I've read. Excuse me.
Sure.
I'm just relating what other stories. Nobody heard about it for several years later. Yeah, they kept it away from the Germans, not to let them know they were successful in destroying that transport and the troops. No, that was kept a secret, and we were also told not to say a word about it. Even when the bodies came in, the Normandy people were warned not to say anything about it. So it was not heard of in the United States for several years later. Yes, sir. We'd go out to meet the transports bringing soldiers in for the rest of the invasion, to be used there, yes. That's all we did, just patrol there. On March, I believe it was March the 9th of 1945, I took a commander of the Coast Guard, I took a general on my cutter, and a destroyer came along and picked up another general. We went to Guernsey Island for the surrender of Guernsey Island. There was 2,200 Germans still on Guernsey Island, and I got to go there and watch the surrender of the Germans. I barely remember. I do remember that we saw 2 little girls on the dock when we pulled up, and I stayed aboard the cutter. Some of the other boys got up with the general, went with him, escorted him up. But these 2 little girls, we asked them, they were English, they could talk, and they were telling us they had already eaten their cats and dogs. I'll never forget that. We were discussing it with them. We took them aboard our cutter and gave them everything we had, but just two little old girls. And I'm glad you asked about that, but that really brings back a memory that we took care of that. They couldn't have been 13 years of age. But they tell us we had to eat our cats and dogs. Can you imagine two young children? The English couldn't drop food at all. Nobody, they could receive no help because the Germans would take all that. The Germans took all their cattle, all their pigs, took all their groceries or vegetables and used it for themselves. So they were starving to death. In other words, they were pretty close to death for not having anything to eat. All I can remember is just a celebration. That's all. Nothing extra that we were doing or anything.
Sure.
It just probably having a drink somewhere and talking to liberation. That was it.
Can you tell us about coming home? What was it like to see your family for the first time?
The first thing I wanted to do, there was a place here in Springfield called the Colonial Bar. It was a Colonial Hotel. It was a corner that I knew that they had told me that all the veterans were going there. So I do remember going back to the bar and meeting several of my friends. In fact, also at the time, I can't remember, but finding out about a few of them who did not come home, how they got killed, where they were and all that. That discussion was among us, naturally. The ones that were survivors, we started talking about what happened to who, where did he go. It was just a meeting place. I've always been, I think, a happy boy. I have no regrets. I was married for 6 years to a wonderful lady. We had a wonderful life. We never had one serious argument till I came home one night intoxicated, and she told me, Jack, if you ever have another drink of whiskey, I'll take these children, I'll take the car and the house, and you're out on your own. Well, that was over 35 years ago, and I quit drinking whiskey. All I drink now is a beer now and then. But she stopped me that night from drinking whiskey. She taught me a lesson, a good lesson, a wonderful life. But I have lived a wonderful life. I have nothing to be sorry about. I had a wonderful mother, a father, a sister, a wife, the children, friends. I've always been active in the athletics. I've enjoyed that. I call myself a success. I played baseball. I played football. I played against Florida State when I was in law school, a small little university called Cumberland University out in Tennessee, and got to play against Florida State. And scored a touchdown. So all my life had been nothing but just, I'm happy with it. I met good friends. Nobody's ever disappointed me. I met so many friends over Normandy. That's why I return as often as I can. And to tell you, one thing that happened was on my 100th birthday, I also got to celebrate it in Normandy. But I was born a Baptist, but I'm ashamed of myself that I haven't been to the church because the Hamlin church had been moved.
If you were to give me some advice for my life, what would you tell me? I'm a similar age you were during the war.
Young man, all I can tell you is keep a smile on your face. When you meet a friend, stay with that friend. If you have an enemy, try to solve whatever it is, find out what is wrong, explain to him. If you have a disagreement with him, you say, here's why I have a disagreement with you. Let's get it straightened out. I don't think I have, at the present time, I can't think of a person that I don't like, and I can't think of a person that doesn't like me, has ever told me, but I don't like you, Jack. It's just one of those things in life that I've enjoyed, being around friends, doing what they want to do, and try to behave. I'm not a real good behavior. I've been a lot of things that I kind of, not bad things, it's small things that I regret that I've done, that I should have done differently. But to me, as long as you got a smile on your face, you keep that smile. You keep your friends. Don't lose them. And if you lose one, just always keep a memory. Always talk about he or her, what it happens to be. But to me, you got to smile each day.
What kind of man do you want people to always think of you as?
As a brave one. just as a brave soldier. That's all.